Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. You know, folks, after witnessing what we did last night, there is a conclusion that we must come to as a nation and a people. It proved that the Republican electorate, at least currently, is driven by blind rage. And we have stated on numerous past episodes of the Wright Flyer that such rage is detrimental to the cause of conservatism as a whole, because when you stop and think about it, it makes the person who is dominated by this blind rage susceptible to being manipulated by charlatans and con men who want nothing more than to tear this country apart and to destroy everything that we stand for and represent. That's not a change. That's something that has existed with us throughout the annals of history, and it becomes a particular problem and a glaring problem when a nation is divided among itself. And there can be no question that the United States of America has been driven to the point of division by this current Barack Hussein Obama regime. He has gone out of his way to trample upon our shared Constitution, which is the social contract that exists between every American citizen by right of birth and their government. And when you are operating outside the proper scope and bounds of that sacred document, you are in breach of contract. You are trampling upon the fundamental and inalienable rights of the popular sovereigns, which is we the people. That's why the founding fathers had worked so hard to establish a separation of powers amongst the three branches of government. Now, that's not to say that the three branches of government are considered equal. No. When you look at the way that Article 1 of the Constitution is written, it is the longest, meaning that the legislature has the most power, followed by the executive, which is defined and outlined in Article 2, and then finally the judiciary in Article 3. Now, in practice, because the judiciary has granted itself powers that were not enumerated unto it by Article 3 of the Constitution, we see that the balance of power has been shifted. And the same is true with respect to the president or the executive going outside the proper scope and boundary of his enumerated powers in an abusive way to strip power away from Congress. But when you look at what the intent of our founding fathers were when they worked to conceive this representative republic of ours, you find that their goal was to allow the branch of government that was closest to the people, over which the people exerted the most control, influence, and power, to be the most powerful branch of government. And that is in line with everything that they believed with respect to the proper form of governance. That's why when you look at the way that the tenets of federalism was set up, the state governments were supposed to have more power than the federal government. Again, it's because the closer it gets to the popular sovereigns, whom the founding fathers believed were the ultimate wielders of sovereignty, power, and authority, the better equipped that government in a representative capacity is to address the varying problems that face the American people. And that goes in line with the natural law tenets that underpin our entire system of government, and indeed the Constitution itself. Because when you stop and look at the framework of it all, the idea is that government starts first with the popular sovereigns who support the stability of the nation by having a stable family environment. Then it goes from there to the municipalities and cities, to counties, to state, then up to the federal government. And the way that our founding fathers had devised this entire governmental structure was for the federal government to operate only on powers that were expressly enumerated unto it within the four corners of the social contract that exists between each sovereign citizen and the government. That is, of course, the Constitution. But we see now that the disjointed promises of New York billionaire, businessman, real estate tycoon, and vulgarian Donaldov Julius Caesar Trumpolini have convinced the vengeful part of the electorate that he deserves their vote. And I don't say that they're vengeful in any way of disparagement or looking down upon them. I mean, that is a totally understandable reaction to have with the way that this government has been going and with the way that the Fabian socialist doctrines, which are just sugar-coated forms of social Marxism, have been thrust down our throats during these two disastrous terms of Barack Hussein Obama. It has been an orchestrated push to tear everything of value of this country apart. But why would they do that? They do that because they want to replace the country. They want to replace what existed before. And that is a common denominator that we see with these radical left-wing groups, philosophies, ideologies, what have you. It's because they have to destroy what came before, as their own political philosophy is morally bankrupt, intellectually bankrupt, and it will, in actuality and realistically and practically, bankrupt the society that they manage to pervert with their twisted machinations. Look at the Cultural Revolution that occurred in China. That was an orchestrated, intentional act on the part of communist dictator and Communist Party chairman Mao Zedong. He wanted to destroy the long and illustrious history of the Chinese people and replace it with his revisionist form of history that would paint communism as the vast inevitability that would grip the country. And it would make it to where he would have a more solid claim on his principles and on his 5-year programs and various other communistical programs that proved disastrous for China and the Chinese people. Things like the Iron Rice Bowl. And part of the reason that he had to have the Cultural Revolution was there, historically speaking, had been this perception with respect to the imperial dynasties that had existed in China before, known as the hydraulic system of government. Now, what exactly is the hydraulic system of government? Well, it states that, like flowing water, the government can only have legitimacy when it freely flows. And then there are cycles that apply. The flooding and the depositing of silt, which would make the farmland and the rice paddies very fertile and would produce enough food for the people. It was considered a bad omen from the so-called Edict of Heaven or Mandate of Heaven if there were famines, floods, comets, or anything that would give this perception that heaven was angry with the leadership and the harmonious balance that Buddhism preached, but not just Buddhism. You had Confucianism and Taoism that preached this type of harmonious balance as well. Once that was lost, then the leader would lose his right to rule. And Chairman Mao wanted nothing to do with that. He wanted to have an iron grip on power, just as any despotic potentate who marches down the lines of the twisted Marxist philosophy do. And you see that everywhere that Marxism is attempted to be entrenched or emplaced or enacted or forced on the people, it always has to become a dictatorship. And what's fascinating is when you look at the actual language of the Communist Manifesto in both Marx's dialectic and then his book with Engels as well, Das Kapital, that always mentioned something known as the dictatorship of the proletariat, or the dictatorship of the working class. It was designed to destroy a system that existed before, and they would do it by hijacking the anger of the people. They would coalesce around this idea that the people's anger could be used for their political gain, irrespective of the harm and detriment that it would cause to society as a whole. That is the goal that they have been working for, striving for, attempting to achieve time and again. But it does not mean that the system works. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. Communism is a resolute disaster for the people of the region of wherever it is established. So it's important that we take pause and realize that with respect to our system of government and our representative republic, we cannot allow Marxist ideology to entrench itself. First of all, it's because it is contrary to the natural law, but it's also contrary to the supreme law of the land, which, as Jeremy and I have stated on numerous past episodes of the Wright Flyer, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, is none other than the Constitution of the United States. That is a reality. It is a reality that we cannot escape. It is a reality that is a quintessential part of the American heritage, character, spirit, and national identity. But we've divorced ourselves from it over time because there has been this exerted effort, this concentrated effort to rewrite our history, to indoctrinate the up-and-coming generations, and indeed those generations that have yet to be born, and to replace it with this idea that maybe socialism's not so bad. Maybe what our founding fathers were pushing for were these notions of Marxist equivalency, Marxist fairness. Nobody deserves to make more, irrespective of the effort, work, research, whatever they put in that would create value. That would be unfair. And then if that doesn't sit with people, then they move to the next prong of their attack, the implementation of the so-called social revolution or cultural revolution, which is to write off our founding fathers as bigoted, sexist, slave-owning white men who didn't believe in anything that they said, and it was just for a select few. Well, it may have seemed that way at the time, but we forget that there were blacks that fought in the revolution, free blacks. The notion of black servitude hadn't really started until the first slave owner, who happened to be black, changed it from the notion of indentured servitude while we were still under the colonial control of Great Britain. These factors get swept away because, again, it goes against the propagandistic message that the radical extremist frothing at the mouth Fabian socialists want to use to push forward their attempt to fundamentally transform our country. And it's important that we recall that that is one of the things that President Obama preached when he was running for the office for the first time back in 2008. Remember, he said, we are about 5 minutes away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America. But what exactly did that mean? What was he reaching for when he was saying that? Well, it was that he was pushing to make the United States of America a Fabian socialist nation, to tear apart the structure of our country that has served us for over 230 years. And he has to make the narrative that way because it would work against him and undermine his efforts if he pointed out the fact that our Constitution is the longest running uninterrupted constitutional document in all of world history. Again, stability is rooted in the open and honest form of a representative republic, which must run off of the consent of the people. Now, as the government increasingly divorces itself from the edicts of our shared Constitution, as they amass more power illicitly unto themselves at the expense of the popular sovereigns, yes, we see that they begin to be in breach of that great social compact or contract which exists between every popular sovereign by right of birth and the federal government. And you see that the problem with Donald Trump is that he doesn't speak to that great promise. He doesn't speak to restoring that promise, which is something that has been handed down for generations. And our founding fathers expected us not only to merely hand it down to the up-and-coming generations and those which have yet to be born, but also to expand it so that they would have a greater opportunity to enjoy in the fruits of the labor of the preceding generations. That is the quintessential part of what is this nebulous notion of the American dream. That is what epitomizes it. That is what defines it. And again, it seems that in haste to lash out at those who would destroy it, we blind ourselves to the reality that is standing before us, threatening to snuff out this great experiment that our founding fathers put forth. That would be a travesty of the worst order, something we could ill afford to allow to happen, but we see it unwavering and unfurling before us like a twisted dystopia threatening to poison everything and to destroy all that we have worked to achieve since the inception of this country 2 centuries ago. And the problem with Donald goes further. He hasn't convinced everybody in the Republican Party to unite behind him. He has failed to convince at least 40% of those who voted against him last night to support him in the general election. Now, this is something that we here at the Wright Flyer have warned about since the beginning. We told you that if you pushed for a divisive Vulgarian candidate, it would drive a wedge between the base of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, and fracture the party. And if the party is fractured, we cannot win. That plays directly into the hands of Hillary Clinton. And I know that Jeremy and I have asked a couple of times before whether that was by design. I have no evidence to directly point to that, but his actions and his message would certainly seem to go down the lines of that. And if these voters who are supporting Donaldoff, Julius Caesar Trumpolini, think they're mad now, wait until they wake up to the realization that what Trump is doing is promoting the most radical position to then whittle back from it, to step back from it gradually as he goes through the so-called negotiation process. And again, he has said that everything is negotiable, but that's not true. It may be true for the type of business that he runs, the type of land dealings and real estate dealings that he engages in on a daily basis. But it is not true with respect to our fundamental and inalienable rights, and it is not true with respect to the way that our Constitution works and the way that this government was intended to work from its inception. That is because, think of it this way. Why do we punish murderers and criminals? We punish them because they're infringing upon the rights of others, and they have no right to do so. We say that murder has no statute of limitations because no one has the right to take away another person's life, just as no one has the right to waive their right to life. In other words, that principle of our legal system is non-negotiable. It used to be that we adopted a policy of never negotiating with terrorists. Now, I know that Barack Hussein Obama has chipped away at that, and I think that that has been detrimental, that it harms the country and what we stand for and the message that we deliver to the rest of the world. But that too should be non-negotiable. And it shows you exactly what happens when you start to negotiate or when you start to waive certain principles which should never be allowed to be up for negotiation. And this is a sort of discussion you're not going to hear from the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. Because again, as we have pointed out time and time again, they are devoted to this propagandistic message of Fabianism, which is diametrically opposed to the central tenets of our representative Republican form of government. Therefore, we have to be vigilant, eternally vigilant with respect to our fundamental and unalienable rights. Because should we fail to do so, the forces of tyranny, despotism, and oppression never rest. They never admit defeat. They keep fighting, and therefore we must be as stalwart in our response to that. And that is why it will be nigh impossible for principled constitutionalists and for conservatives who are alarmed by some of the brash and abrasive behavior of Donald Trump to throw their weight behind him in a general election. You see, actions have consequences, and the exit polls, as well as recent polling, which pits Donald against any of the Democrat choices in head-to-head contests, meaning head-to-head contests with Madam Clinton or head-to-head contests with Vermont Senator Noidface Boing Me Sanders, are going to result in defeat. He cannot win. And Trump, along with some of his supporters, failed to realize the proverbial Pandora's box of anger they have opened with respect to staunch constitutionalists. But it all ties into the reasoning that I provided earlier and just mentioned. We cannot, in good conscience, support someone who gleefully boasts about how he would continue to clamp down on the impermissible use of executive orders in direct defiance of the Constitution if he doesn't get his way. And then there's this whole notion of two sets of rules applying to Donald that don't apply to everyone else, and that is problematic. Take, for instance, he called into Fox and Friends morning show, even though Fox had set rules, ground rules, that no candidate right before the right before the Mega Tuesday primaries would be allowed to do telephonic conversations. But he broke that rule, and they allowed him to. It shows that he doesn't believe that laws apply to him. And in that sense, he is the personification of this sort of elitism that is driving the anger and blind rage in many instances within the American population. And then there's this idea that he's self-funding. Folks, that's a joke. Donald Trump is not self-funding. He's loaning himself money, which he's then paying off via the campaign and will net a profit off of that. That's what we call money laundering. That's what organized crime, mob bosses, mafia leaders do. But that's certainly not something that a president should do. That is not the sort of tarnishment of corruption that we should allow to be flung upon this great republic of ours. The reason I say that is it harms the credibility of the conservative movement. It further propagates and promotes this sort of corruption that is rotting the foundations of our Republican form of government, and it legitimizes some of the most vile and base complaints that have been lobbed at us by the most rabid of the Fabian socialists, who want nothing less than the sheer and utter annihilation of the United States of America as we know it and love it today. You know, it's not far-fetched to say that I look around this country today and it's not the country I grew up in. I know that this is a sentiment that is shared by Americans from coast to coast. They see the very social fabric of their beloved nation unraveling before their very eyes, and that causes fear, pessimism, anger, and rage. Yes, it's natural, but the anger that Donald is now unleashing in the feckless way that he has treated his opponents, by getting rid of civil discourse in the political process, by reserving his attacks for his fellow Republicans as opposed to the true opponent who will be facing him in the general election, he has divided and fractured the party, to the point now that I wonder if it is even capable to call for unity. And in fact, Trump did, in his victory speech from Mega Tuesday, finally called for unity. However, it's too little too late. The Republican frontrunner, as I just mentioned, spent more political capital and energy attacking fellow Republicans than his Democrat opponents. The supporters of those candidates who opposed him have been alienated by his brash and vulgar attacks. And folks, there is no way to get around that or to sugarcoat that or to claim that it didn't happen. Now, I can already hear the attacks from those most staunch advocates of Donald, like Corey Lewandowski, who is already facing criminal charges for the Michelle Fields incident. And irrespective of whether you believe that that is a legitimate claim or not, it tarnishes him. And to have that man standing behind his right shoulder, over his right shoulder, as he was delivering that rambling victory speech, further discredits him, further drives a wedge into the base of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, and further brings us to the brink of defeat. And what is so tragic about that is this was our election to win. We have suffered through 2 terms of one of the most disastrous regimes in living memory. That should have paved the way for an easy victory. But instead, we have allowed a vulgarian who has been a Fabian socialist for the vast majority of his adult life to waltz in to our primary process and to pit us against one another. And the chickens are coming home to roost. Now, Donald Trump is not alone to blame for this vicious, venomous atmosphere that currently grips the 2016 presidential election cycle. The detente wing of the gutless opposition party is just as much to blame, if not more so, by ignoring the will of the American people at any given opportunity. Look at all of the promises they made in the midterm elections of November of 2014 and how they have betrayed us on each and every one of them. Look at how we booted former Speaker of the House John Boehner out of his speakership and selected Benedict Arnold Paul Ryan, the same Benedict Arnold Paul Ryan who claimed in years past and in election cycles past that he would promote a bill that would balance the federal budget. Instead, he hands to Obama on a silver platter his omnibus spending bill that would fund everything from executive amnesty to the EPA's attempts to continue to strangle the life out of our energy sector and to destroy jobs and the economy. And it's because of this detente mentality, this live and let live mentality, that they do that. But it's also in part this elitist mentality that they embrace, where they thumb their nose at the base of the party and they are embarrassed by the base of the party. But that is not going to win them any elections. It's not going to curry any favors with the base, and it is just going to cause this sort of divisive atmosphere that we see unfurling before us continue. But if anyone thinks that Donald Trump is going to be some paragon of conservative values and that he's a staunch capitalist, they need to go back and look at his record again. Now, I know I've heard it time and again, sometimes on the comment sections here on our show page, that his past is irrelevant, it doesn't matter. But no, it is a predictor for how he will act. Sure, people evolve over time, but his consistently inconsistent statements do not give me any faith or hope that he would embrace conservatism for the first time. He's using it as a ploy, and he will force us all to negotiate our sacred values and principles. Because when he says that everything is up for negotiation, that means our values as well. I'm sorry, I don't buy into that. I go by the Constitution, but also the contractual law doctrine of caveat emptor, which is Latin for buyer beware. We should all beware of who it is that we cast our lot with, because there is a price to pay. For those of us that support Cruz, we know that the price would be that we, as popular sovereigns, must unite together and work to save this country. Because of the way that this country is designed and established, our founding fathers meant for it to be that we would be the only ones that could save it. And we are the ultimate arbiters of power and authority in this representative republic of ours. But for a man to say that me, I'm the only one that can do this, you have to trust me, irrespective of what I said in the past, no. One singular individual does not have the capacity nor the power to do this. And for those of us who understand this, it is why we cannot and we will not sacrifice our principles. The price of doing so would be unbearable. No, the time for compromise is over. And Donald Trump set the tone. And this is really what it comes down to. We cannot, with good conscience at least, throw our support behind a man who has disrespected our choices for whom we thought was best suited to run this country, and to the views that we adhere to. That would be a betrayal of everything that is great about this country. You see, when Donald Trump says that we're going to make America great again, what does he mean? How is he going to make America great again? Again, he hasn't explained his position. Sure, he's put out memos from his website. I want to hear him explain it himself. I don't want to hear what his staff writers cobbled together to throw out to convince us. I want to hear from the man himself that he believes what he is now preaching. Because I've heard from the man himself in the past that he did not support those positions, and that he supported and espoused and promoted and funded the exact opposite of what he is claiming now. Again, it goes down the lines of that old adage of actions speak louder than words. Well, Donald Trump's actions have not given me any reason to have confidence that he will be who he claims to be right now. I'm sorry, folks, but that is the way that it works. Everything that we hold near and dear, everything that is of paramount importance to us is on the line right now. And we cannot allow those nefarious forces who are working nonstop to attack it to have their way, because that works against all of us as a whole and as a people. And it makes sense that our principles and our values must take center stage, because those principles and those values are what have secured us for over 2 centuries. Does this mean that I'm part of the establishment? No, I'm not. I don't like what the so-called establishment has done. I don't like being lied to. I don't like watching this country barreling towards the cliff of Fabian socialism merely to watch it fall off the edge, plunging into the abyss of destruction, anarchy, chaos, and mayhem. That goes against everything that I believe in, everything that my parents taught me, everything that I value as an officer of the court. But above all, what I value as an American sovereign citizen. I do not want to see a charlatan and a snake oil salesman take away our rights. I don't want to see it be taken away from any American citizen, because that is a great departure from everything that makes this country great. You see, folks, these are things we cannot ignore. They are things that are a quintessential part of who we are, and if we let go of them, it will be damn near impossible to rein this Leviathan back in. So, what does this mean for the general election? It means it will start off as an uphill battle for Donald, should he somehow clinch the nomination. And it's important to remember that the contest isn't over, folks. This is not me admitting defeat. This is not any of the Cruz crew admitting defeat. Those of us who are opposed to Donald Trump are more determined now than ever to unite and place an end to his campaign. We don't do this as disparagement to his supporters. In many cases, his supporters and we agree on nearly everything. perhaps 90% of our views. But the way in which they have turned to attacking us simply for disagreeing with them, to the way that they have come out and said that those who disagree with Donald have no right to be in this country, as was reported by those two young souls who are misguided in their own right for supporting Bernie Sanders, but still brought this to our attention, that there were those at a North Carolina Trump rally that were arguing for the exile, for lack of a better term, of those who disagree with Trump once he became president. None of that reflects the values of who we are. If you are a citizen of this country, law-abiding citizen of this country, no, you should not be subjected to that for merely disagreeing with a bombastic, brash, vulgarian real estate mogul out of New York. Why would that even cross their minds? And it crosses their minds because they are gripped by blind rage. They're not looking at the facts. They're not looking at reality. They are just looking at themselves and saying, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. That's great. Be mad. But do something constructive with that anger, rather than just filing behind the so-called wrecking ball to destroy this great representative republic of ours, because there will be dire consequences for that. Dire consequences. And you will have no one else to blame at that point than yourselves. Now, I can already hear it. Those that are calling for the unity will sit there and say that those of us who are standing up for principle and showing that we have the will to fight are the ones to blame for this. No. We didn't start this fight, but we're damn sure going to finish it either way that it happens. This is a principled stance that we are taking because of our convictions and our principles. It is far better to lose a noble stand than to win underhandedly. Now, we all know that Donald has been projecting onto Ted Cruz his own underhandedness. I didn't buy it at the start, and I don't buy it now. And we see that he's bought off Dr. Ben I'm a Victim Carson, the supposed and so-called principled Christian conservative that was in here to bring civility back to the election process and cycle and to proper government. But we've seen how that he clinches firmly in his hand 30 pieces of silver. And it's a shame. It's a shame because he is a likable guy. He's a likable guy that didn't realize what it takes to win a fight when a nation is in the midst of a great identity crisis, as the United States of America is as I speak into this microphone. And to betray his followers in the manner in which he has also is tragic. It's tragic because it moves against everything that he spoke of. All of the values that he pushed for. He has now betrayed that. And I don't like to see that. I don't want that to be the case. I want him to have a bright future, just as I want each and every one of us to have a bright future. But the only way that we are going to attain that bright future is if we restore the Constitution. And that requires a bit more finesse than being a wrecking ball, or as my first officer, Jeremy Graventon, likes to refer to Donald, a monkey with a hand grenade. Because that will destroy not only the monkey, it'll destroy anybody in his immediate vicinity. This isn't a form of elitism. This isn't a form of class warfare. This is a principled fight like our founding fathers would take, standing up to the vulgarians who wanted to deny us liberty, who wanted to deprive us of our say and our consent and our destiny. That is what this principled stance is, and that is why we are willing to continue fighting, irrespective of the odds, irrespective of whatever amount of adversity faces us. If that makes us blind, then so be it. It makes our founding fathers blind too, and I would rather be that sort of blind than to buy into the blind rage of just destroy everything because I'm sick and tired of politics as usual. And again, I don't say this to disparage. I say this to make the point of we are better than this. Each and every one of us is better than this. And it is time to coalesce behind a candidate who will put a stop to this inferno that is threatening to engulf everything that we hold near and dear. Because believe me, the fight that will be unleashed and the anger that will be unleashed if Donald Trump leads us to defeat, or if Donald Trump wins and turns out to be the type of dictator that his own actions show him to be, it will unleash a torrent and wave of anger, the likes of which this nation has not seen since our long and drawn-out bloody struggle for independence over 230 years ago. That reality sticks with us. It stands out because it is a part of who we are. Remember that Barack Hussein Obama went before the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and their cameras and claimed that racism is a part of the DNA of the United States. Really? Where in the Constitution does it say that we, the people of the United States of America, gather so that we can oppress one race? Where does it say in the preamble to the Bill of Rights that we do this to oppress a race? It's nowhere. You'll find it in Article Non, Section Existent, Clause 0, because it is not a part of our shared Constitution. And no, this is not an archaic way of reading the Constitution or understanding the Constitution. The language of the Constitution is written so that a fifth grader can understand it. Why? Because it is meant for all to understand, irrespective of class, irrespective of education. In other words, we all have equal protection under the law, and that is a tantamount part and quintessential part of this great representative republic of ours. But it is a part that we have lost by being pushed to the extreme fringes of blind rage, burning with the inferno of destruction, which leaves us as malleable as putty in the hands of charlatans and snake oil salesmen and frauds and hucksters that would do anything to destroy us. And it reminds me of something that former presidential candidate Mike Huckabee, said. Cruz is right in saying that it's a two-man race now, but those two people are Hillary and Donald. Hey, Mike, I know you like to raise taxes in Arkansas, and that's why you lost your governorship. And I know that you like to continually run for the office of president and fail each and every time. But quit trying to strip away the voice of those who stand in stark opposition to Donald Trump. You know what, folks? We are the voice of a new resistance. We are a resistance. This is a movement that each and every one of us can coalesce behind to say enough is enough. And if they want to see anger, let them see the righteous indignation that flows from our ranks, the unstoppable and conquerable American people. That is the message that we convey at this point. That is what we must do now. There are no exceptions now. There is no other path. We must stand in opposition to anyone who stands directly opposed to our shared Constitution. And yes, folks, I am including the real estate vulgarian Don Nodolf Julius Caesar Trumpolini in those ranks. It is time for us to hold the line, and that is exactly what we are doing. But we must remain cognizant of the fact that our country is more important than our rage. You see, that's what we don't hear from Donald. That's what we don't hear from many of his acolytes. There is a misconception now that there is no greater good for the country, or that is somehow espousing establishment principles. No, that is not espousing establishment principles. That is going against everything that we stand for as a nation. Because when you say that it's an establishment position to support the Constitution, you must remember that the establishment has been opposed to the Constitution from day one. That's why we have supported a man who, through his own record, has demonstrated time and again all throughout his adult life that he is willing to do all that is necessary to stand for the Constitution. Now, as he was willing to stand up against all adversity, so too must we be willing to stand up against all adversity. This is not an unwinnable fight. This is a fight for us to win, and we can still win it. We are at the halfway point. It is time for us to catch our second wind and to outmaneuver these troglodytes that are out to destroy everything that we value. Now, if that sounds incendiary, it's not. That is the righteous indignation that is boiling in the hearts, souls, and minds of those Americans who still love and support the Constitution. That's not a losing battle. That's not a losing place. That is the position we hold. That is what we must win, because if we should fail, then we lose. So we've now crossed the river, and I've set the boats behind us ablaze. We either fight or we die. That is the point we're at now. No more division. No more petty squabbles. It is time that we unite to put a stop to those Fabian socialists on either side of the political aisle. That means Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders or whoever else it may be. This is our time to coalesce behind a principled constitutionalist and not just support some brash vulgarian who is self-centered. Because when you do that, you are pushing this country to the edge of ruination. And I think that that plays into the designs of Hillary and Donald both. Now, sure, Donald has a delegate lead. And I can hear the voice of the trumpeteers claiming that this is insurmountable. Fact is, it isn't. These voices are similar to those who claim that our founding fathers couldn't achieve victory in the struggle for independence. Remember, the founding fathers themselves came close to defeat on numerous occasions. Despite this, they were never willing to give up the fight. Dogged tenacity drove them onwards, just as it drives Cruz supporters onwards. We've heard the phrase anger used throughout this 2016 election cycle. We've even heard conservative pundits like Rush Limbaugh claim that anger isn't something to be disparaged. I agree, anger isn't a bad thing if it is couched in logic and reason. And of course, that just re-emphasizes the message that I pervade from the start of this program. Do not let anger turn into blind rage, because then you lose your ability to make righteous decisions, to make informed decisions. Instead, you become blinded and can be manipulated by nefarious forces that want you to play a part in the utter annihilation of this representative republic of ours. There is no other way to put that. There is no other way to state that or to demonstrate who we are and what we represent. Because it is to a point now that the Fabian socialists are frothing at the mouth. They think that they are within grasp of their twisted machinations to bring the destruction of this country and to replace it with a dystopia that will benefit no one except the elites. This is why Alexander de Tocqueville called socialism New Age feudalism, because its entire purpose, its entire central focus is the micromanagement of the facets of our daily lives, controlling us from cradle until grave. That is serfdom, folks. And look at what Donald Trump has said time and again with respect to health care. We can't just have people dying in the street, and yet in the past he supported universal health care. Universal health care would be an unmitigated disaster. And if he's willing to compromise on that, the Democrats are going to push and push and push. And yes, the art of the deal says that you can walk away from a negotiation. But when it comes to our values, to our principles, and to our identity as American citizens, we cannot walk away. We cannot. That is not an option. This is now to the point where we have crossed the river, the boats are burnt, and we have the river to our back. We either fight or we die. And that is something that a negotiator does not understand. Look at the way he's just cut out of another Fox News debate. That's not negotiation. That's a poltroon running away from the duties and responsibilities of those that want to wield the reins of political power in this country. And it's pathetic. And if that offends you, I'm not sorry. It is pathetic. Because there is no other way to describe that. That is an insult to the American people. We want to see him explain what his policies are from his own lips and to defend them. And if he can't do that, then he's not qualified. It is that simple, folks. It is truly that simple. But again, you're not going to hear the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media speak to that. Because once again, that goes against the propagandistic message that they wish to convey, that they're working for, that they are pushing. No, we don't accept that. That is not our position. That is not our principles. That is not who we are, and that is not what we will stand for. Those are the realities that Donald Trump must recognize. And no, these positions are non-negotiable. And unfortunately with Trump, we don't see anger that is couched in logic and reason. I see a man setting brush fires to our republic with no plans to control the burn. It is lunacy to hire an arsonist to put out his own blaze. Remember, Hitler's reign of tyranny also began with the burning of the Reichstag, with a fire of anger. Now, it is true that the Reichstag fire was a physical fire, and that the one with Trump is merely proverbial or anecdotal at this point. But the comparison is valid. Historically speaking, dictators use a divided and troubled country to clinch the reins of political power. They've done it through violent and legitimate methods before. Remember, Hitler tried violent revolution first in 1923 with the Beer Hall Putsch, before deciding to use the election cycle against itself. That is where we are with Donald Trump. He is now trying to use the election cycle to promote himself, to push himself up, and he's asking that all of his supporters just discard with the statements and positions that he held in the past. I'm sorry, that's not something I can do, because that is the yardstick at which I measure and predict what his future conduct will be. And that's not a gamble I'm willing to take when the very life of this nation and the very identity of this nation and our sovereignty hangs in the balance. That is not something that I can allow. And that is how most of the people who are terrified by the abrasive nature and this authoritarianism that flows from Donald Trump feel as well. And it is why we will dig in our heels and fight to the bitter end if necessary. Because we know that truth stands on our side. And folks, we here at the Wright Flyer are dedicated to the truth, and the truth has no agenda. None. Look, Trump has based his entire campaign on a messianic approach. Hitler did that too. Mussolini did that. Lenin did that. Ho Chi Minh did that. All of the dictators of modernity have done that. If you stop and also think about it, it's the same thing that Obama did. Because Trump claims that only he, with his superhuman negotiation skills, could resolve the problems facing the nation. That's the same thing, almost verbatim, that Obama promised. And if you stop and think about it for a moment, the major problem most of us have with Obama is that he attempts to work around Congress outside the proper scope and boundaries of our shared Constitution. It works against everything that we hold near and dear. And that is why we have reached a fever pitch of anger, because the establishments of both parties are there, fanning the flames, aggravating the problems that are facing the country, and refusing to do a blessed thing about it. Except we have seen one man who is now being punished, apparently, for doing what he said he would do, just because he was in government. He was the one senator that filibustered against the Gang of Eight and then went down to the House of Representatives and organized the movement to stop the advancement of that. He is the man that has withstood being stabbed in the back by Jeff Sessions, by Sarah Palin, and by all of the other faux conservatives who have sold their principles for 30 pieces of gleaming silver. I would rather stand behind that than I would a man who is consistently inconsistent. A man who proactively encourages his followers to engage in acts of violence, carry them out on stretchers, beat the hell out of them. That is not presidential material. That goes against the strain and fiber of what it means to be an American citizen. It goes against everything we value. We are better than this as a people and as a nation. And it is this concentration of power going against our Republican form of government that has unleashed the chaos that grips our beloved nation. Jeremy and I have both stated that the key to solving our problems has always been right before us. It has been there with us since the founding of this nation. It was the foresight of our founding fathers to give us the greatest birthright of any people on the face of the planet. And that birthright is none other than our shared United States Constitution. And isn't that such a brilliant thing? A document that states that no, the government works at the behest of the people and that the people are the true masters of this government. That had never been attempted before. That had never been tried anywhere else on earth. And we are still the greatest example of it, despite the fact that we have seen our federal government push in numerous times to divorce itself from strict adherence to that sacred principle document. But the way to maintain that is not to just blow it all up, to set fire to it and to pour gasoline on it, to watch the flames reach towards the heaven as the spirit of our country goes up in smoke. No one in their right mind would do that. But someone who has been blinded by rage would. Like someone so driven by anger that they kill someone they love just because that person did something that angered them. It may excuse them from murder, but it's still a crime. And we are witnessing a crime befalling our nation, befalling our people, poisoning us, pitting us against one another in a tactic of deceit. This deceitful tactic of divide and conquer, where they are going to do everything within their power to ensure that a weak Fabian socialist candidate is able to secure the reins of political power. This has played out perfectly for the goal that they have set for themselves, and it is playing out against us, we, the popular sovereigns, we, the ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this great representative republic. And again, it is something we can ill afford, because we see with the selection of Obama for the Supreme Court nomination of Judge Merrick Garland, that we are once again in a fight for the balance of the Supreme Court, for the balance of who we are, for the very epitome of what it is to be an American. And we must realize exactly what is at stake. Now, who is this Judge Merrick Garland that Obama announced as his choice today? Well, he doesn't support our Second Amendment right to keep and bear firearms. He would allow the EPA to continue its alarming assault against American businesses and the energy sector. And he would not be the stalwart of constitutional originalism that late Associate Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia would be. And in other words, that means that the balance of the court would shift in such a way as to redefine the nation, to put all of those things that we value and cherish at significant risk. And again, folks, that is not something we can afford. Not now. Not when everything is hanging in the balance. Judge Garland must not be accepted. And again, just as we, as the popular sovereigns, the electorate of this republic, who are the ultimate arbiters of sovereignty and authority in this country, must stand up for our fundamental and unalienable rights and to stand up for our principles and our convictions, so too must Congress. This is non-negotiable. And that's another thing that I think that Donaldus would ignore or doesn't understand, because as he has said time and time again, everything is up for negotiation. No, sir. No, sir. Our rights are not up for negotiation. They are not up to be handed to you. They are not there for you to just continue to poison the political atmosphere in this country. And what we see with Obama, again, is that he claims that Congress must comply with his choice and confirm his nomination. Yet Article 2 states that the Senate has the duty to advise and consent. In other words, there is no constitutional obligation for the legislature to confirm the president's nomination. This again clearly demonstrates why the Constitution carries such weight and importance, because it defines the narrative of how this fight will go. It defines what duties and responsibilities each branch of government has. This is why we understand what the true, proper scope and application of federal authority is. It's because it is there in that sacred contract that exists between every popular sovereign and their federal government. Again, this is why it is important that we all foster a working and fluent knowledge of our shared Constitution, and thereby our fundamental and unalienable rights, because through that we then take the steps that are necessary to tell those who would abuse their power, those who would tear us apart and tear apart this sacred Constitution, no, you do not have the power and authority to do that, because it does not belong to you. It belongs to we, the people. Again, that goes to the strain of identity that is the quintessential part of American sovereignty and polity. It explains why our system works the way it does, who we are as a nation and as a people, and what we stand for. Now, of course, the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media are already attempting to paint Judge Garland as a centrist. Now, why would they do this? Because once again, it adheres to their propagandistic agenda to push this country steadily, incrementally, further to the left. Whether or not this is an accurate description is irrelevant. The current political climate of the United States demonstrates that we cannot afford to settle on our principles. Again, it comes back to the central theme of this entire solo flight. We must, as unique sovereigns and the ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this country, stand on our principles, because no one else can. No one else is empowered to do so. No one else has the authority to do so. And guess what, folks? No one else is interested in doing it, because they're interested in getting goodies for themselves, collecting power for themselves, all at the expense of the popular sovereigns. And yes, Donald J. Trump is one of those people. Oh, how can I say that? Well, we've seen the way that he boasts about greasing the palms and buying politicians. If he buys politicians, he now sees that there's power to be had. And throughout his entire life, he has always been about himself and benefiting himself and being greedy. Now, greed itself is not a bad thing. But that being your sole motivation for wanting to take the office, the highest office of a representative republic, of one of the most powerful nations, no, the most powerful nation in the world, despite the efforts of Obama to weaken it. No, that is not justification. That is not something that will restore this country. And you see, it's this dichotomy that exists within his campaign. He's both the wrecking ball, but he's also going to, quote unquote, make America great again. How? We know about all the demolition. That's all you talk about. How are you going to rebuild it? Because I'm assuming, because you haven't said anything to the contrary, that part of your destruction, part of your rampage here is the annihilation of the Constitution, that foundational law of this great representative republic. So what are you going to replace it with? And we have a right to know that, because even if we don't vote for you and somehow you miraculously manage to clinch victory in the general election after clinching the nomination, you're supposed to represent all Americans. But I don't think you have the capacity to do so, because you do a piss-poor job of representing yourself. And that is why you have not convinced Jeremy or myself to support you. Just as I am sure you have not convinced a vast majority of our cherished listening passengers and audience of supporting you either. I am convinced of supporting the Constitution, what my forefathers have fought for since my family first came to this land back in 1635, fought in the American Revolution, fought in the Texas Revolution. I believe in supporting the values that have been there, the cherished values that our ancestors sacrificed so much to achieve. That takes paramount importance with me. But I don't hear that from Mr. Trump. I don't hear that from some of his most angry acolytes. If you want me to unify behind Trump, then you're going to have to clearly demonstrate to me how he will continue to support the foundations of this country and the Constitution. And I'm sorry, I just don't see how you can, because every promise that he made ultimately violates the sacred principles of our shared Constitution. Everything he said goes against our nature as a nation and as a people. It's diametrically opposed to everything that our founding fathers sought to establish. And it is for this reason that support against Trump has already started to and will galvanize against him. There is no proof that his recent change of heart will stay. Rush attempted to state on one of his previous shows that there's no way that Trump could rule like Obama. Party hardliners on both sides will oppose him, and that impeachment threats would be made. But in all honesty, how many times have presidents been impeached and removed from office? 0. Now, there have been 2 impeachments, but no removal. First was Andrew Johnson, and later Bill Clinton. This really isn't a viable option. Rush should know better. He should know better, because he was part of one of the biggest impeachments that didn't result in removal. And therefore, a President Donald Trump is not going to experience much resistance. Or he's going to cause there to be a negotiation in which he settles out our rights, which again, that is unacceptable, because our rights are non-negotiable. They have been non-negotiable from the start, and they shall remain non-negotiable, and we will stand and fight for these principles. Now, I've already heard some close friends and associates say that this current election cycle is not the election to put principles first. The problem is, they say this at every election. They repeat the erroneous claim that the previous president was the worst threat, and that this will stem the tide, and that this coming president, this coming challenger is going to be even worse than the one that was the worst. Yet, by continuing to vote the lesser of 2 evils, we allow the process of shifting to the left to accelerate unimpeded. And folks, it is insanity to continue doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, because we are not going to get different results from this. It does not change the current condition in the country. So the hardliners of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, are once again expecting us to just coalesce behind whoever has an R after their name. It makes me wonder, would they do the same if Adolf Hitler had an R next to his name? Well, that's outlandish. No, it's really not. Because it's the same tired bovine excrement and manure we have heard election cycle after election cycle. And no, folks, I'm not going to continue to support that, and I don't think the vast majority of you will either. If those who support Donald Trump want to burn down the entire edifice, then have at it. They are burning themselves in the process, and there is no duty or obligation on our part to go bail them out. We have done our part warning them, explaining to them, showing to them where their candidate is unacceptable, and they refused to listen. In fact, they turned and attacked us. Well, turnabout's fair play. Turnabout is fair play. And since they want to think that their leader is such a great negotiator, the way I see it is he has tried to negotiate with me. I'm walking away from this negotiation because I don't like the terms. That's something he advocated in his own book. I'm just doing what he did. Why is it okay for him to do it, but not me? Or for conservatives who will not stand up for him, will not vote for him, will not choose to allow their vote to go to this dangerous snake oil salesman and charlatan, the P.T. Barnum of our age, the one who said that a sucker is born every minute. That's where we are, folks. That is what it is. And if you want me to support him, you better find some better terms. You better make this a negotiation. Otherwise, you only care about his negotiating skills when it's winning you over. But there are always two parties to a negotiation. He can go negotiate with a brick wall all he wants. It's not going to change the brick wall. Yeah, he can throw a wrecking ball at it, but all of the components that were there that made it up is still there. It's not going to change. The facts are the facts. And you see, that's the problem. Those that have been blinded by rage are ignoring the facts. They are not acknowledging the facts. In fact, they are refusing to acknowledge that the facts even exist. And that works to their great detriment. It works against everything that they are espousing. And when we see that they are wanting us to bow down to this sort of insanity, which is being defined in this case as doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results, they're not winning me over. Just as I'm sure they're not winning most of you over. This is why it is more important than ever to stand for our principles, because it shows once again that even those who claim to be on our side, who claim to be advocating for the same positions that we are failing to do so, that they are willing to fold like lawn chairs on those most sacred principles and values which have led us to the great and lofty heights that we have achieved in our relatively short but illustrious history. Facts must guide us. Reason must guide us, and we must stand behind our shared Constitution, because the Constitution provides the supreme law of the land, and that defines who we are as citizens, because citizenship ties into the sovereignty of the nation, and in this republic, sovereignty rests squarely on the shoulders of we the people. It is why the preamble to the United States Constitution starts with those beautiful words, "We the people of the United States." In other words, each and every one of us is sovereign. And if we allow our rage to be manipulated to such a point that we witness the utter and total annihilation of this great representative republic of ours, we'll have no one to blame but ourselves. We will have to turn to our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and so on and so forth, and explain to them why we allowed someone who did not believe in, who did not adhere to, who did not support their birthright to tear it up. And let me tell you right here and right now that the up and coming generations and those generations that have yet to be born yet will judge us most harshly for that. They will look upon us as if we are a bunch of morons that gambled away everything that mattered to them without a second thought as to what that might do to the future of this country, might do to their chances, might do to their hopes and aspirations. And they would be right to be angry. You want to talk about anger? Feel the anger of both the past generations that fought for this country and those generations that are up and coming that saw and will see that we have squandered this great opportunity to restore the greatest government this nation has ever seen, or indeed this world has ever seen. And again, no one is to blame for this but we ourselves. That should galvanize each and every one of us to take the necessary and proper stance to defend our fundamental and inalienable rights, to be the stalwarts for liberty that our founding fathers commanded that we be. And above all, that we hand it down to those generations, that we don't betray them, that we don't become the laughingstock of history because we allowed our own self-interest to misguide us. You see, that is the stark and harsh reality that all of us face as popular sovereigns. And folks, it is squarely at our feet to decide how to act, to decide what decisions to make, to determine what the proper course and outcome for this nation is. And that decision is for we and we alone. No one else can make that decision. No one can force us to make the decision that we're making now. So, as we make decisions, particularly in exercising our fundamental and unalienable right, we must also accept the consequences for the way in which we utilize those sacred rights. We must take responsibility for all of our actions. That is what it means to be a popular sovereign. That is what it means to take responsibility. And yes, that is what our founding fathers would have expected us to do. There is no way around that. There is no other way to put that. That is the truth that we all must accept as popular sovereigns if we are to maintain our national identity and to stand up for what we represent and what our forefathers represented and what this nation itself represents. So while I understand your anger, I again explain to you that those who disagree with Donald Trump will take just as much of a principled stance against him and will refuse to back down. It is not in our nature to back down, especially when the stakes are so high. And with that said, folks, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you for choosing to fly with the Wright Flyer. I also invite you to leave any questions, comments, or concerns either here on our YouTube page or on our Google Plus page or our Facebook page. And I also invite you to follow us at Twitter with the Twitter handle of @RadioAviationX. Folks, that's all one word, @RadioAviationEX. One more time, @RadioAviationEX. And there you'll find our departure list where you can find our personal accounts, one for my First Officer Jeremy Grapenton, one for myself, and to our Blogspot page, which I do need to get on and put a post on here soon. Expect one in the next day or so. And also to our Cafe Press site. Folks, I want you to go ahead and take a look at that. We have some wonderful merchandise. If you support us, go ahead and voice your support for us with those little trinkets and things that are very nice. It has our logo. And also, you can be a first-class passenger that way, too, which shows that you are an enlightened person who cares about this country. Once again, folks, thank you for flying with us. We will see you next time. Do take care. Bye for now.